Awesome. Good morning, everyone. I am Shannon Hayes, and I'm coming to you live from Crossing Point Christian Church, and I'm excited to be your host for We Wear the Mask, this being the first in a series of conversations about race in private white spaces. So it is an exciting thing to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us. We're going to jump right in respect of everyone's time. And because we have a lot of important things to cover, we're just going to dive into our discussion for the day. So the purpose of this event is to affirm the experience of African American parents and students, to inform parents and stakeholders, and to empower African American parents and students with the knowledge to make steps toward positive change. That is our goal and our purpose for this event today. So as we engage in this important conversation, we'll do so in community. And we'll do so in community governed by the following community norms. So pay attention, everyone. These are our norms. We ask that everyone would please mute their microphones. As you were listening to each presenter, as questions arise, is just enter them into the chat. They will be addressed according to time. We can only address so many questions, however. So as you were listening to each presenter, just simply enter a question that comes to mind into the chat, and we'll see if we can get it answered. Also, we want to be respectful of the opinions of others during these discussions. These discussions are very important. People are very impassioned about their views. We want to respect opinions of others. We want to do so in a way that allows different views to be shared. Remember, the biggest sign of your confidence is your ability to listen to someone else's view. So we will listen to others' views in a respectful manner. We're going to approach this dialogue with our first and foremost identity being in Christ. With this identity, we need to understand that what unites us in Christ is bigger than anything that may divide us. So this is about us and we, it is not about them. Also, as we go through our discussion today, we're going to follow the example and the instruction that's found in James chapter 1, verse 9. We're going to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. We're going to demonstrate respect for others and the opinions that are shared. We're also not going to mention our respective schools by name. We're not going to mention any teachers or administrators' names. We're going to make sure that we use discretion, amen, as we have our discussion today. Also, make sure that you speak from the I perspective. We don't want to use generalizations such as they. So make sure that you speak from your perspective, that we're not, putting our opinions on the masses. Amen. So speak from the I perspective. Always assume positive intent in community. Amen. We're going to think the best of one another. And always remember that intent does not always equal impact. Amen. If you want to have an impact, you have to be targeted, and you have to be introspective, and you have to be well-timed. So intent does not always equal impact. And lastly, remember that what stays in here, what stays in this conversation, what is learned in this conversation leaves here. As a visionary of this conversation has put forth, he always says that we are here to inspire a movement in our current culture, in our current climate. So speaking of the visionary behind We Wear the Mask, he is Mr. Stephen Tolliver. And Stephen Tolliver, many of you know, he is our first presenter of the day. So let me let you know a little bit about Mr. Tolliver. He is an educator, he is a motivator, and an instructional leader with nearly 20 years of experience in private and public education and abroad. He is the author of It Is Not for Kings. He currently serves as administrator in Aldine ISD. So here to present the first session of our conversation, he's going to be speaking about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I present to you the first in this exciting conversation, Mr. Stephen Tolliver.
Good morning, and thank you, Shannon. I'm excited and I'm encouraged to see everyone's faces today. And as we began this journey, one of which will present many opportunities for us to have a dialogue and to really sit down and discuss what are the implications and the circumstances surrounding our students in not only private white spaces, but also in public spaces, period. We need to look at the pathology. If something happens once, it happens. It's an incident. If it happens again, repeatedly, it's a pattern. If it happens over and over and over again, it's a pathology. And today, what we want to begin our sessions with is the pathology behind our experience here in America as African Americans. So about 20 years ago, I had an injury playing sports, and I tore my ACL. I blew out my knee, and I had to have my knee repaired surgically. But there are times where even now, after having healed after 20 years, I experienced difficulty with range of motion in my knee. It doesn't operate the same as the other knee. There's always the implication, there's always a reminder of that scar, the reminder that that incident took place. And as we talk about our experience here in the United States as African Americans, there are scars, there is scar tissue, there are implications, there are reminders day to day of an experience that we may not have directly been impacted by, but indirectly we're impacted by every day. So as I share my screen with you today, I want to share with you, I want to share your screen, please. I want to talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And post-traumatic slave syndrome is defined as the history of trauma passed down from generation to generation, thereby the effects of chattel slavery of African Americans that have been passed down to their descendants. And if I can get permission to share my screen, I will share my slides with you. So initially, this theory began in 2007 with sociologist Dr. Joy DeGruy. And the context in which she approached it was simply that our experience in America, our racial socialization in America, has led to some of the traumatic effects and some of the behaviors that we see every day. My goals today in this presentation are to help us understand how racist socialization in America has impacted Black people, to explore the impact of trauma on people of African descent. And as we enter into this, we must first understand something about history. James Baldwin probably coined it best when he said, history is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we're literally criminals. Meaning that history, although it may have occurred in the past, it impacts today. So a brief history of the African-American experience here is that initially in 1619, the first slave was brought to the United States. And this was not the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, but this is actually the slave trade coming to America. About 5% of the slaves in the slave trade came to the United States. And as this begins, we began to see not only the culture of slavery take place and take root in the United States, but also it becomes legalized in the late 1600s, 1700s, as one of the first slaves in the 1700s is actually legally made property of a white man. And this begins the antebellum period of slavery. During this time period, more and more Africans are brought here and socialized into chattel slavery. This time period comes to a head in the 1860s during the Civil War, one of the main causes of the Civil War, and slavery as an institution ends, but the treatment of African Americans does not. After all, it is written in law and bonded, and African Americans are actually considered to be 3/5 of a human being at this time, and that law remained on the books. Even with the freeing of slaves or emancipation of slaves, we go to the Reconstruction period in 1865 through 1877, in which African Americans are freed and given all the rights and privileges of Americans on the books, but there are clauses such as the 13th Amendment that led to the Convict Leasing Act, where Black men are literally exploited, Black women are literally exploited and terrorized during this period. This leads to Jim Crow, which is white backlash that actually lasted close to 100 years, in which African Americans are considered second-class citizens. There are lynchings, there's legal ramifications that actually restrict their movement, restrict progress, restrict their abilities to actually enjoy the American dream. And in the 1950s and 60s, we have the Civil Rights Movement, which fought for rights that African Americans could enjoy, but yet still, what we find is that even though laws have been changed, and even though there have been movements to allow us to be able to enjoy some of the rights and privileges that all Americans should enjoy, it is the behavior, it's the socialization of America that has actually marked our experience. So up to this present age, there's still scar tissue. There's still rights and privileges that we do not enjoy. So a little bit about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And Joy DeGroot will actually share this with us.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on, and then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes, so 300 years of trauma, no help, freed. No help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African-American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a Black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The Black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the Black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the Black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody Black knows that even though the Black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid, he's shiftless, he can't work, because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, you know, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. You know, all of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were, you know, African-American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death, that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, you know, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being black? How does factoring in being black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You're socialized. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
So, effects of trauma. When we look at trauma, we have 4 different categories, one of which is global trauma, which is something that we're experiencing right now. COVID-19 has impacted the world, and there hasn't been a pandemic of this nature since 1918. This is going to be a traumatic experience that the world remembers. We have national traumas, like 9/11, in which our nation was attacked by terrorists. And in that, we mourn every year on 9/11, and we're constantly reminded of this. We have multi-generational trauma, the transatlantic slave trade, in which generation after generation it's passed down. And then we have personal trauma. And I'll stop here at personal trauma because one way we understand our experience as African Americans here is that when we experience someone who has experienced trauma, one of the ways that the trauma is repeated and that it's never able to be healed from is when we deny that experience, when we don't affirm the experience. When someone's abused or raped or someone has their rights denied, when we deny them the opportunity, one, to share what has happened to them, and the opportunity, we're denying them the opportunity to heal. So today, as we go into our sessions and as we talk more and sessions that follow this, understand that we need to acknowledge the pain and the trauma that actually has taken place in order for us to begin to truly heal. One of the adaptive behaviors is the denial of, or maladaptive behaviors is the denial of what has actually happened as we move forward. But if we're going to truly heal, we have to acknowledge that we have experienced a global, a national, and multi-generational trauma and personal traumas of our own as we go into the future. As we work with our kids to help them understand how they're to navigate through spaces in which they may possibly experience trauma or may have experienced trauma. Now, as we look at trauma quantified, what we find is that African Americans typically have a shorter lifespan than whites and other non-African Americans. We are, as African American men, 1 in 3 of us have the probability of being incarcerated. And although we only make up 13.4% of the population, 16% of us have reported having mental illness in the past year. And these stats is late as 2018. So there is something that is happening and that has happened to us that is impacting our livelihood and impacting our quality of life here on this continent. Some of the maladaptive behaviors that come as a result of post-traumatic slave syndrome are that of vacant self-esteem, so insufficient development of what Dr. DeGruy refers to as primary self-esteem, along with feelings of hopelessness, depression, and a general self-destructive outlook. Ever-present anger, extreme feelings of suspicion, perceived negative motivations of others, violence against oneself, property, or others, including members of one's own family or group or acquaintances. Racist socialization, not to be confused with racial socialization, in which we teach our children and people who come after us what their racial identity is. But racist socialization is the process by which African Americans adopt racist attitudes and perceptions passed down as a result of racist ideology. Hence, some of the examples: blacks are violent. We're all good at sports. White schools are better than black schools. My hair is not good, or my hair is good, based on its texture. That's racist. That's racist socialization, and the end result ends up being self-hatred and acts of self-hatred that harm that begin to manifest themselves in a pathology that leads to violence, drugs, self-destructive behaviors. This is what trauma looks like for us today as we look at the landscape. And Dr. DeGruy has actually coined or helped us understand what post-traumatic stress syndrome is, but it's a phenomenon that results based on a single occurrence. And it can be directly or indirectly impacting that of our families and members of our family. So adaptive behaviors. And these are some of the things that we do as a result of post-traumatic slave syndrome to help us survive. We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the very bottom is this basic, survival needs: food, shelter, and then we go to belonging and esteem, and then we move to self-actualization. But these behaviors that we see here are literally they are here, and they're a result of us surviving in America. One is code switching. You may be familiar with that. We know that we talk one way at home, we talk another way at our jobs or at school or in settings where others may be present. A dual consciousness, right? There's this idea that when I'm at work, there's a me. When I'm at home, there's another me. And when I'm around family, there's another me. Appropriate adaptation. Literally the ability to be able to look at a situation, gauge it, and become someone else so that I am able to survive and be accepted. And then there's dramaturgy, which is acting out roles, acting out ideals, and literally acting so that I can survive. Black parents may be familiar with this, especially if you have young Black men, and I'm sure that Dr. Hines will touch on this in his segment, but the idea of policemen. I had the conversation with my parents when I was young as probably 13 or 14 years old, about what to do whenever I encountered a cop, and how to survive, what to do, how to make the cop feel comfortable so that I wouldn't lose my life. So when we see situations like that of Rashard Brooks, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, those are all too familiar wounds and all too familiar scars for Black men, where we see this and we say, man, I had that conversation. I wonder if they had it. And that shouldn't be. But what we see is that we have made adaptations to our environment, made adaptations to our behavior so that we can survive in our environment, so that we can live from one generation to the next. We will touch more on the effects of post-traumatic slave syndrome throughout the series that we have throughout the course of the next year. But what I want to look at in terms of healing, and just to have you walk away with some nuggets today before we go into our questions, is this. Learning self-efficacy versus learned helplessness. Understanding that, I have the ability to control my actions in my environment, in spite of what the environment may say about me or how I may be treated within the environment. Knowing yourself. Parents, it is vital for us to actually acknowledge the trauma, acknowledge the things that have happened in the past, so that we can inform our students, inform our kids as they go forward, so they have a knowledge of who they actually are. Because if they don't know who they are, the world will tell them. Media plays a great role in socializing how we act and how we treat each other. And oftentimes, whenever I speak with staff or I talk to people about ways to truly affirm the identity of African Americans in their classes, I always tell them, stop watching the news for a week. Cut out the media for a little while, get off social media for a little while, and you begin to actually see people as people versus stereotypes. Displaying an open mind and racial socialization for our students, helping them understand that they have a Black identity, and that this is what that entails. This is what this means. We must make the distinction between racial socialization versus racist socialization. We don't want to pass down the negative stereotypes and pass down the negative behaviors and negative ideals that surround being Black, but we want to pass down what's positive. What the resiliency that comes as a result of us being able to survive 400 years of slavery and 400 years of slavery, and also 100 years of disenfranchisement. So those are some healing additives that we want to look at going forward. But I want to introduce this to you today because this is going to lay out the backdrop for a lot of our presentations and help us understand that we do have some healing to do as African Americans. Now, at this time, I do want to entertain some questions, and I want to thank you for your time as we go into questioning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tolliver. And if anyone does have a question that they would like to pose at this time, then please enter your question into the chat, and we'd love to present your question to Mr. Tolliver at this time so that we can continue our discussion. Remember, this is a conversation, and we want to get you in on the conversation. So post your questions in the chat. I do want to pose one question, Mr. Tolliver. As you were speaking, you talked about and focused on us acknowledging the trauma. And I wanted to ask you a question on informing versus acknowledging. Many times that acknowledgement, should it be a personal acknowledgement or more of a generalized acknowledgement? And the reason I ask that question is many times we wait for other people to acknowledge our trauma before we feel as if we can heal and move forward. And we can spend a lifetime waiting on someone else to acknowledge our trauma in order to heal. So is it necessary for the masses to acknowledge my trauma? Is it more pertinent that I personally acknowledge it and then put steps toward healing in place? And then I work on just informing the masses of my trauma. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned the different types of trauma in the presentation, your global, national, multi-generational, and your personal trauma. I think the issue that is taking place with us is that we are waiting for the world to acknowledge something that we have personally experienced ourselves. And I think we start at home. Start with yourself. Look at your situation, look at your family, look at your family dynamics, look at some of the pathologies that exist within your own family, within your own house, and ask yourself, is this healthy behavior, right? And healthy behavior is behavior that heals, elevates, loves, and propels. So if the behavior that I'm seeing in my home doesn't do that, if the behavior that I'm seeing we tear each other down, right? We have self-destructive behaviors that we engage in as a result of how we feel about ourselves, or we experience what we talked about in terms of vacant self-esteem, right? Not low self-esteem, vacant self-esteem. Then there's a problem there. And I believe at that point, that's when we begin to not only acknowledge, but begin to inform. And informing requires us that we actually go out and seek out the information, find the information. Oftentimes when we talk to some of our white counterparts, they'll say, well, I never owned slaves. Well, I was never a slave. Yet still, we have structures in place, because racism is not just an ideal. It's not just an ideology. It's a structure, right? When you write it in your laws, it becomes a structure, it becomes law, right? So the idea that at one point in time we were considered 3/5 of a person, and that was never truly expunged. Like that was, we have amendments for that, but that in and of itself is a structure. We have to acknowledge that. And if the world won't acknowledge it, we need to at least acknowledge it ourselves if we want to be whole and heal. I have another question in the chat.
Yes. We have a question from Dana Thomas, and she asked, at what age do you suggest starting conversations about race with children in PWIs?
I suggest having these conversations as early as possible. The reason why is because although we make attempts to shield our students and shield our kids from certain ideals and certain thinking processes, we have to understand that they're interfacing with the world each day. They see the structures of race in their everyday experiences. And this may not be the case for non-African Americans. It may not be the case for whites, or we may not feel like it's that way, but for our students, it is, right? Because every time they go into an environment and look at themselves or look at someone else and don't see themselves, they have to question. They have to go in and they're trying to work through it mentally, understand, okay, well, why does this person act this way? Why does this person do this, right? I think that if we're proactive and we make it a point to do that early on, then what we're actually doing is we're cultivating our kids and we're growing in them a sense of self. We see it in other cultures. We see it in Arabic cultures. We see it in Latino culture. There's certain ideals that we pass on. What I think we do is we wait. And then once something happens, then we react to it versus being responsive and saying, look, this is the intentional agenda I've set for my kid. I want my kid to understand this is who they are. This is why they're here. And this is what I expect them to do. That in and of itself is, I think, priceless.
Awesome. We have another question from Cassandra Webster. She asked if you could restate the racist socialization and the racial socialization difference to clarify the term and self-esteem, vacant self-esteem.
Okay. Racist socialization is the idea of passing down racist ideology to the next generation. So it's the negative socialization that takes place. We pass down the idea of self-hatred. We pass down what maybe other groups may think about us, and what other groups have said about us that may be diminishing to who we are. Racial socialization is the idea that this is race. This is the idea of race, and here are some of the things that we do. And really, it has more to do with acculturation than anything else. Helping our kids understand who they are versus what the world says about them. And as far as vacant self-esteem. The idea of vacant self-esteem is not to be confused with low self-esteem. Vacant self-esteem is basically the idea that I don't really have a reason to feel good about myself, right? It's the vacuum, and where there's a vacuum, something's going to fill it, right? So if I have vacant self-esteem, what ends up happening is someone will tell me who I am. Someone will assign me a role, assign me a place in society, assign me a place in the classroom. Carter G. Woodson put it best. He said, if a man believes that he's less than, even if you allow him to go through the front door, he will go to the back door and create a back door for his own convenience because he believes this. And this is the power of belief. Having vacant self-esteem is the idea that I'm not worthy of. And because I'm not worthy of, I'll never accept anything more than what I've been given by society. I believe you had another hand.
Thank you, Mr. Tolliver. Just to clarify, if you do have a question, please type it into the chat. This is our debrief segment, and it's our opportunity to debrief and actually discuss what Mr. Tolliver just presented, which was an amazing presentation. Just to also clarify, we may use some acronyms that everyone is familiar with. If we state the acronym PWI, we are referring to predominantly white institutions. And that is what this conversation is centered around in terms of our children. How do they interact in these spaces where they are not all the times represented fully and completely? And so how do we as parents help to boost them and encourage them and strengthen them in those spaces where they step in knowing that they indeed belong? And so if there are any other questions, please post them in the chat at this time. Thank you for that explanation on vacant self-esteem and racist socialization versus racist socialization versus racial socialization. If you do have questions, please let us know. Mr. Tolliver is here to answer. He is here to answer. So in approaching this school year, as we are entering into it headlong in the days to come, Mr. Tolliver, what do you think is going to be the most pressing need for our students as they are entering into this current space that we're in?
I believe that students must have a certain level of awareness about the world that they're living in. First being who they are, and who they are not only from a racial perspective, but also in Christ, who they are. And also understanding that what they are seeing is cumulative. It's the cumulative effects of decisions that people have made in the past that have been passed down. Again, these are structures that are in place. They're not necessarily just the attitudes of individuals, like these are the attitudes of groups in some cases, but they're influenced by history. I think that students have to understand that these are basically, there's historical forces that are at work that are actually coming into play in our everyday life. And because of that, our students have to understand that, they have to armor themselves with the idea that they have value. Not only do they have value, but they also have purpose. And that is something that I think that generations before us have had, and we have to equip our kids with. It's just that, we are links in a chain. So our kids are links in a chain. They're here not only to enjoy the benefits of being in a society where maybe they have enjoyed more rights than their grandparents, but they're here also to advocate for themselves and be able to help others that come behind them as they work towards achieving equality and equity in spaces that historically they have not.
We have another question that has been posted, and it states, as a parent, I wonder what our children think about their parents when we begin to have these discussions and share our experiences with racism. I wonder how our kids feel when they are confronted with these different types of racism. And that's going to be something that we're going to address later on in this session, in this conversation. But it speaks to the role as parents. So in answering that question, Mr. Tolliver, as parents, what role do we have in terms of heightening our children's understanding? Because they may be in an environment where they're not going to get that awareness in their schools, certainly, and maybe in the circles, the social circles that they find themselves in. So what role do parents have in terms of intentionally heightening their students' awareness?
I think as a parent, our role is to facilitate discussions within the home that help with the cognitive dissonance that kids experience. Obviously, race is an idea that can actually become a structure in our society, but it's a 500-year-old concept. I mean, race is 500 years ago. We weren't referring to people based on race. That's actually an invention that propels racism. So racism is the father, not the child of race. So as parents, we're supposed to facilitate that discussion with our kids, help our kids understand, these are some of the things that could be happening. Cognitive dissonance is when the mind experiences something that it does not quite comprehend, and it's the confusion that takes place as a result of, you left your car keys on the table last night, but they're not there anymore, right? There's a period in time when you're almost in denial about the fact that those keys are not there and they've been moved, but no one has been in the house with me. Where could they have been? I know I don't leave my keys here. I know that this is not where I leave my keys, or I know that I leave my keys here all the time, but why they're not here? Our kids are used to, interacting with their peers a certain way. They're used to certain treatment. And when that changes, they need someone to help them understand. Kids are wonderful observers, but horrible interpreters. So they see maybe I've been friends with this child who may not be Black. And we've been friends all throughout elementary. And all of a sudden, when we get to middle school, there's a sleepover and I don't get invited. Or they get with their other friends and it's different now. They act different when they're around these friends. It's our job to help them understand that. It's our job to help them understand it in such a way where we don't pass on, again, the racist socialization versus racial socialization. We don't pass on the bitterness past experiences, but we help pass on the understanding and the awareness that will equip our kids.
And now for the final question of this particular debrief session. There's a question posted by Dana Thomas. What are ways that we can ensure that teachers and administrators are aware of microaggressions toward minority students? Excellent question.
Well, I think one, Mr. Hadger is going to be touching on that a little bit more at the end of this segment, so I don't want to answer too much. But I believe engaging with the administration and engaging with teachers early on to kind of set the stage and help teachers understand, this is what I'm trying to teach my child. This is what I'm trying to instill in my kid. These are the things or the behaviors that I'm on the lookout for, right? It's almost like going into a situation with a teacher or an administrator, and your child may have a difference in their learning, or they may have a preference in their learning. Okay, where you have that conversation to make the teacher and the administrator aware, and then you monitor, and then you periodically check in, right? You periodically check in, and what that's going to do is that's going to create a situation where that teacher or that administrator is going to have to be aware of the fact that, okay, there is something that either I don't have or something I need to access, information I need to access to better understand how to serve your student. Otherwise, if it's never acknowledged, it didn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Tolliver. You have certainly informed and heightened our perspective today with an amazing presentation. I hope, parents, that you have been taking notes. I know this in response to one of the questions that was posted. Will this be available later? Is it being recorded? Well, right now, we're streaming live on Facebook on the Crossing Point Church page. We're also streaming live on YouTube on the Crossing Point Church channel. And so it's available now on live stream. Go onto your social media platforms on Facebook, on YouTube, share it, like it, get this information out there. The more that it is shared and liked, the more people that can access it. Know that after we conclude today, it will continue to be available on those platforms, and Crossing Point Church will be certain to provide a link so that all of you can go back and watch again. So we're excited about all the participation that we have today. We have a full house. We're excited about all of you who have signed up, and we are really ready to move forward in preparing and equipping our families and our children for not just a successful school year, but for a successful lifetime. Amen. Remember, this is inspiring a movement. This is not just a moment, it is a movement, as Mr. Tolliver says. And so as we proceed forward, we are entering into session 2 at this time. And I'm excited to have Dr. Mac Hines as our next presenter. Dr. Hines is a professor. He's a cultural proficiency presenter, and he's a published author of the book, White Teacher, Black Student. Dr. Hines invites parents into the reality of Black manhood and maturation in a society that has historically viewed Black male progeny as a threat to the established order. Dr. Hines' session will provide in-depth discussion on equipping Black males with the necessary tools for survival in the current climate of this country. So here to enlighten us with his thoughts on if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon, Dr. Mac Hines. Good morning, Dr. Hines.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I have a PowerPoint. Is there a way you can transfer me a co-host so I can show it? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Mac Hines. I'm really excited to be in what will go down as one of the greatest acts of proficiency for Afro-American males in white spaces. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk with you about if I had a son. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint, and then we will go from there. So if I had a son, can everybody see my PowerPoint? Good, okay. So when Mr. Tolliver asked me to do the presentation, of course, anything Leroy asked me to do, I'll always do because of his passion for our people. I really started thinking, if I had a son, and I was taking some time doing the research, and I went from thinking, if I had a son, in the words of our first African-American president, Barack Obama, to I have a son, because we all have sons. We all have Trayvon Martins in our lives, be it our cousins, our nephews, our sons. They are all Trayvon Martins. So before we get into my point I want to make, I want to just give you a little bit of background about this beautiful young African-American man. Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old African-American male that was born February 6, 1995. And he was from Miami, Florida. He had one older brother. His parents were divorced, and he had a great fascination with aviation. And we all know the story that he went to Sanford, Florida to visit his father. He went to the store to get some Skittles and never made it back to his father's place because of an overzealous, quote unquote, Citizen Patrol decided to take it upon his hand to snatch him away from us. But even though Trayvon was killed, what he stood for still stands with us, that he was indeed a part of our culture. And so the thing about Trayvon is that he was young, he was gifted, and he was Black. He was young, he was gifted, and he was Black. But Trayvon was not murdered or accosted because he was young. He was definitely not accosted because he was gifted. He was accosted because he was Black. And when I think about that particular sentiment right there, I have to understand that when I say if I had a son, I'm saying we all have sons because we're all Trayvon Martins. We all have some type of kinship to Black males that make us understand that, in essence, we are all Trayvon Martin. When this happened, I remember Ebony releasing a series of magazine covers with Dwayne Wade, Spike Lee, Boris Kojo, and a lot of other celebrities where they all said, in essence, we are all Trayvon Martin. And I was deeply touched by this presentation from Ebony because this was one of the first times in a long time where, regardless of race, regardless of class or income or location, Black people really felt Trayvon Martin. And the reason being is that, again, we are all Trayvon Martin. We are all kin in some ways to young, gifted Black males who continue to be snatched from us due to racism and white supremacy in America. But going a step further.
Dr. Hines.
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, but your PowerPoint presentation is so amazing. Could you put it and maximize it to presentation mode so all of the attendees can see it more clearly?
Okay. Let me see, how would I do that? Give me 1 second, please. Oh, I think I figured out. Here it is right here. How about that? Is that better? Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay. So as I was saying, we are all Trayvon Martin. Year in and year out, we continue to see more Trayvon Martins happen, whether it is Ahmaud Arbery, whether it is Botham Jean, who was killed right here in where I live in Dallas. And you look lately, the one that really galvanized America to finally take action, well, more specifically, white America to finally take action, was the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Atiana Jefferson. Year after year, we keep getting a roll call of Trayvon Martins that are continually murdered in our country. And that's why I'm saying to you this morning, we are all Trayvon Martin, and we must recognize the implication of what this means for us as African-American people. Now, let's go a step further. If you look at these faces, you don't know the names of these people. They're not celebrities, but they're still all young, gifted Black males who have a 1 in 4 chance of being incarcerated and have a 2 in 4 chances of being murdered for unjust reasons. And I want you to take a few minutes, audience, to really look at these different pictures. You see African-American males who are young. You see African-American males who are older. You see African-American males with gleam and excitement in their eyes. And then you see some African-American males who look angry. What all these African-American males have in common is that they are indeed Black males, and they are indeed born into a system that continuously looks down on them because of their masculinity and their racial identity. When I think about this situation of we're all Trayvon Martin, here's my main point today. We are all Trayvon Martin because whether you realize it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we all as Black people walk around with a hoodie. What do I mean when I say that? We have, since coming to America, we have all been made to endure racial harassment, racial oppression, racial obstruction, racial denigration, a racial invasion. When I say racial invasion, that means since coming here, who we have been as African-American people has been continuously invaded, stripped, marginalized, deracialized, to the point where, in the words of the late, great Malcolm X, many of us don't really even know who we are as Black people. And then last but not least, racial exclusion, where we have not been given an opportunity to continuously realize the American dream for us as a people. And this is very important to me because of the fact that when you look at what Mr. Tolliver talked about with Joy DeGruy's groundbreaking theory on post-traumatic slavery syndrome, you see that one of the major after effects of that is we live in a racial hoodie. We wear a racial hoodie every single day. And that hoodie, at some point, you know that if you wear something heavy, at some point, if you're not careful, it weighs you down. As a people, we have been continually weighed down by racial harassment. We have been continually weighed down by racial oppression. We've been continually weighed down by racial obstruction. We've been continually weighed down by racial integration. We've been continually weighed down by racial invasion, and we've been continually weighed down by racial exclusion. And it's no wonder we are still saying, in the words of the late great Fannie Lou Hamer, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And one of the main reasons we're sick and tired of being sick and tired is because of the armor we've been made to wear to try to make it in America. And the irony is that this same hoodie that you see on the screen that was a major contributing factor to Trayvon Martin being viewed as being suspicious enough to where where that person, I don't want to mention his name, felt he needed to take him away from us, is the same literal and racially symbolic hoodie that we as a people are binding together and that we continue to fight against in order to make it a way of life for us as African Americans. So for me, the big implication for African American males, especially our young African American males in public school, private school settings, is at some point, it is our responsibility as the elder statesmen and elder stateswomen of Black America to really start a sincere process of guiding the demasculation of African American male students. When I say demasculation, that means at some point, our African American males today must be given the opportunity to be able to take the mask off and live freely as young Black men in America. They say each generation gets better. My parents were born where they spent half their lives not having equal rights and the other half with having equal rights. But they still had to slowly exercise those equal rights within a mask. Myself and my two brothers, younger brothers, we were the first generation of Hines family where we were born having our full rights, all of our rights. I don't know what it was like to live in segregation. I don't know what it was like to actually see a whites only this, or whites only that, or blacks only this, or blacks only that. But still, with me coming on the heels of my parents enduring segregation, I definitely grasped this mask as a security blanket to be able to navigate and deal in America. I've had many situations where I've attempted to take this mask off and assert myself as a Black man, only to be met with retaliation and trepidation. I have two younger sons, one 8, one 3. And I'm getting a little emotional because I want my African American males, and I want you to want the African American males that are coming up now to finally be able to exhale, to be able to take this mask off to where they no longer have to hide their cheeks and shade their eyes, as Paul Laurence Dunbar so eloquently wrote. We want African American males today to really be able to live in a time to where they can actually just be young, be gifted, and be Black. But that process does not start through osmosis. That process starts with parents. We cannot look to white people to demasculate us. We cannot look to get the government to demasculate us. We as a people must take this process of demasculation very seriously. And the way in which we demasculate our African American males is by first having candid, straightforward conversations with them about what it means to be young, gifted Black males in America. and talk with them in ways to where they don't leave that conversation afraid to assert themselves as Black males, but being more unaware of how to assert themselves to be prepared for any type of backlash they may receive for being who they are. I think Star Jones said it best. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. So we have to be able to help our African American males understand that yes, you will face some setbacks, but turn those setbacks into a setup for a comeback to still be proud of who you are in your identity as Black men. I think that once we start the process of really helping them understand that it is okay to be Black, it is okay to resist racist socialization that we're inundated with each and every day as Blacks in America. And yes, it is okay to dream any dream you want to dream and pursue it. Then we will help African American males to move to the next step of the demasculation process, which really is to really get a solid, powerful education. As a consultant, I travel across the country. I talk to so many African American males, and half of them have a plan to pursue their dreams, but they don't have a platform. The other half have the platform, but they don't have a plan. So it is our duty, it's our moral obligations to teach young African American males how to plan for their success. I always tell my 8-year-old that failing to plan is planning to fail. And he says, "What do you mean by that, Dad?" That means whatever you want to do in life, you have to make sure you have a plan, and then don't let anybody stop you from achieving that plan. Talking with our African American males about planning, about thinking things through, about looking at the world as their oyster and not as an albatross, I think is a critical step to getting them to move from not just being proud to be Black, which is first and foremost the foundation, but then walking in their Blackness towards excellence and achievement. I think the last thing that I feel that will help permanently remove this mask to demasculate so many of our African American males is helping them understand the importance of putting God first. I say this as a Black man, I say this as a preacher's kid, understanding that you do all things through Christ who strengthens you. That it is important for our African American males to understand that the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and end of any and everything they want to do, has to start with Christ. So my wife and I, what we've been doing with both our sons now that we're home, we're watching church online, is that we're doing miniature Bible lessons with them before we do church, because we're starting to realize that without Christ, you have nothing. So in other words, if you know God, you know peace. If you have no God, you have no peace. And so I think that these are the three things, helping them understand their Blackness, helping them plan to move forward in their Blackness to achieve their dreams, and also using God as their guide. When I was younger, I used to always see this bumper sticker that says, God is my co-pilot. Within the last 5 years, that sticker has changed to, if God is your co-pilot, you swap seats. So really making sure that God is the pilot and he's guiding our African American males' lives is essential. Turning our African American males over to God is a big part of this demasculation process that I speak of. So I think that this is important, that we have to understand that we're all, every African American panelist, participant here today, we are all Trayvon Martin, because we're all akin to Black males in some form of fashion that causes us to have an emotional attachment to the African American man in our lives. And that's why when we see African American males killed, what sometimes seems weekly and daily in America, it really bothers us to no end, because not only do we realize that that could be our African American males that we personally know, but it is a part of a larger cultural system that still has anti-Blackness as a part of its agenda against African American males. But what we can do on our part is to make sure that we do any and everything to help African American males understand that they don't have to walk around with masks any longer. All they have to do is walk around in faith, the faith of God, the support from parents and the surrounding communities, and the inner belief that they can do anything they wish to do as long as they keep God as the center. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. That was an amazing presentation. I am excited just about this much needed focus on the African American male. You know, we are loving how Black women and Black girls are rocking it. We talk about Black girl magic, and we see some of the things that our women and young ladies are doing out in the collective space in our communities. And oftentimes in that process, we overlook African American males. And I'm so thrilled about this focus that we have during this conversation today, especially as you focus in on the need for Christ to be the center of the Black and the African American male identity, which is amazing. It's exactly where we need to be moving forward. But I want to ask you and pose this question and remind everyone as we're in our debriefing session after Dr. Hines' amazing presentation. Please post your questions in the chat. We want to make sure that we present them to Dr. Hines so that he can address you personally. But I would like to ask you this. What are some practical ways that we can collectively as a community do what you just said, support African American males and their success spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically? Are there some practical steps or some practical advice that you can give us, some examples as to how the community, we can collectively help to support the African American male in his success?
I think the most important thing that we have to do first and foremost is we have to start what I feel is what I call a reclamation project for Black males. If you to know that in one of the slides, I presented you with a picture of a different groups of different types of African American boys. Some of the African American boys had tattoos, some had earrings, some were very clean cut, some will look what quote unquote the media would call as being hood. We have to realize that regardless of how our African Americans look and initially present themselves, they are still our children. They are still our responsibility. They are still a part of the village. They are still invited to the cookout. I think that one of the disadvantages that happen with integration is that integration opened the floodgates for Black people to really prosper financially and economically. And I have been guilty of this as well, where there began a sense of classism within Black America, where with regard to income of how we began to look, some Black people actually thought that they were better than other Black people. There's never been a time, in my opinion, there's never been a time in America where any Black person, I don't care how much you're worth, what you do for a living, there's never been a time in America where Black people have had the room to really believe that they're different from or better than other Black people. We're all part of the same village, and we must all reclaim all Black males and bring them back into the village. Some of the African American males have gone outside the village, and one of the reasons is because they don't have any support. When you lose hope, you lose everything. So it is our duty to reclaim them and give them hope and help them understand that they are still supported, they're still valued, they're still loved, and they still can be whatever they want to be. The second and most important thing that we have to do for African American males is hold them accountable. It's what I call the AAA. We have to be available, we have to be accountable, and we want them to be accessible to what they to be successful in this country. We have to make sure they are available for success. Show African American males how to be available to be a success. Once we help them learn how to become available to be successful, hold them accountable. African American males must be held accountable for their path to success. We're not going to give you any free lunch. We're going to hold you accountable, because we know that if we hold you accountable, we increase the likelihood of you being able to always be respectful towards yourself to do any and everything you want to do. The last thing we have to do is make sure that African American males have access to the resources to support what they want to do. So it's one thing to talk the talk about saying we believe in you, Black male. Another thing is walk the walk, and we're going to show you by giving you resources. And the most important resource that we can give African American males is support and love. You can give them a lot of tangible resources, but if there's no support and no love, it's going to be hard for them to be able to make sense of why you're asking them to do what you feel they should be able to do. So I think those are practical things that we can do each and every day. If you're riding down the street and you see a young Black male that may look lost, hey, start a conversation. Hey, how are you doing? What's your name? What's going on with you? We can no longer afford to be afraid to certain Black males based on how they look, because if you peel back the look, you'll see that there's still a person there that needs support, that needs love, that needs to be valued. And we all want those things, and we have to be able to give it to our African American males too. So I think those are the first steps that we must continuously practice over and over and over again. Because when you see a Black male in Walmart, or whether you see a Black male downtown Houston, or whether you see a Black male in the Fifth Ward, those Black males are all Trayvon Martin, and then those Black males are all us.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, for answering that question. You know, all those practical steps that you gave are applicable to anyone, regardless of race. We can all walk in those practical steps. And I love the fact, I'm so excited that on the call today, in this conference attending, we have people of all races. And so those practical steps can be walked out by anyone, regardless of race, in terms of supporting the success of the African American males. As you talked about those particular steps that we can engage in, we have another question that has been posted by Madison Hayes. She asked, what would you say to the younger generation that categorizes Black males or females as dark-skinned or light-skinned, etc.? As you spoke on some of the issues we have to address within the culture, how would you address Madison's question today?
What was the question again?
She asked, what would you say to the younger generation that categorizes Black males and even females as dark-skinned, light-skinned, based on their appearance versus based on their character? What advice
I
would
would
you
help
give?
them understand that is a symptom of not understanding your heritage. When I was younger, one of the things that I sadly admit, one of the things that we used to do is when we would play the dozens with each other, if there was always a person that was darker skinned, we would always say, look at your Black self. And we really thought that was being big, that we were really playing a dozen with them. But as I got older and more informed, I began to understand that is a part of a system of self-hate, where we began to say the darker the color, somehow less Black that person was, or that was an ugly type of Blackness. I think that I would refer that generation back to the late great James Brown anthem, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." James Brown didn't say it loud, I'm light-skinned Black, I'm dark-skinned Black, I'm brown-skinned Black. He just said, hey, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And that all shades of Blackness are beautiful, and that we must and we have to embrace Blackness as being different shades that make up the whole gradation of the beautiful mosaic that is Black people. So I think we have to educate African American, younger generation African American, help them understand that when you classify people as light skinned, dark skinned, if you're classifying them in that way to create a hierarchy of importance, then you in some ways are no better than the white systems that have denigrated Black people due to skin color. So it's important for us to understand that we must say it loud, we're Black and we're proud, and that blackness knows no limits regardless of gradation. That's what I would suggest.
The next question that we have has been presented by Mr. Tolliver. He asks, how do we compete against the message of misogyny and stereotypes that society presents of Black manhood?
I think what we have to do is we have to ask. I think my grandma used to always say when I was younger, believe half of what you read and half of what you see. So we have to be able as a race to use our God-given cultural intelligence to discern what is really worth our consideration. And we have to be able to educate our young African-American males, in the words of Public Enemy, to don't believe the hype. Don't fall for the okie doke. Help them understand that media images of Black males are images that were not constructed by Black people. Media images of Black male are almost always constructed by white people, which is a reflection of white systems, which has historically and categorically never been about promoting the positivity of people of African descent. For me, this is all about educating our African-American people. I think Malcolm X said it best: knowledge is power. So many of our younger generations of African-American people, knowledge base is very limited when it comes to who we are as a people. It is vitally important that we, Black people, take the responsibility to really educate our children starting at a young age and re-educating them on what and who they are. If you don't know who you are, then you don't know whose you are. And it is important for our young African Americans to understand who they are as a people. Now, it doesn't mean that being Black should be the only part of who they are as people in America. But if they don't have a clear understanding of their identity as African American people, it will be hard for them to have an anchor to help guide them through different situations. Because almost 95% of the things that we see in America in some way come back to be rooted to some forms of race and racism. So it is imperative that our young children understand that, and they understand what those images project and why they're designed to project that way, to really understand that. And you know what? One of the most important movies I ever saw was Boys in the Hood. There's a scene in Boys in the Hood where the Lawrence Fishburne character is taking Cuba Gooding and Morris Chestnut to this community, and he asked them, he says, do you know why they have liquor stores on every corner? And I was like, well, why do they? Because where I'm from, I grew up in a middle-class Black neighborhood, but on every corner, there was a liquor store. And I never understood that until that movie. So it's all about educating and informing our kids on how to think different ways. And my last response to this is this: anything that is learned can be unlearned. So it is important of helping our African American children unlearn certain things that they believe to be the gospel when it is not.
That is awesome, Dr. Hines. It's all about educating and informing. Well, you have definitely educated and informed us today. We so thank you for your presentation. If I had a son, he would look like Trayvon, and the realization that we're all Trayvon. So Dr. Hines, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. We are going to prepare to go into our next session with a presenter that I'm very thrilled about having today. But as we do that, after our next session, we're going to have an amazing group of young people, a panel comprised of high school and college students, and they'll be presenting their perspective on this issue. So parents, grab your teens, grab your kids, let them listen in on the conversation. We want to hear from them during that team panel. So get their questions ready. We'd love to hear their perspectives and their questions as well and have them addressed. So this is a great time as we're preparing for the next session to gather them in and have them to be a part of this important conversation that we are having today. So for session 3, I'm excited about having our next guest, Joel Hazard. Joel is the upper head of school at Fort Bend Christian Academy, and he's an educator of nearly 20 years in private Christian schools. Mr. Hazard's session deals with cultural orientation questions that are necessary for African American families to ask regarding the 3 C's. Those 3 C's are culture, curriculum, and climate. So presenting challenges that lie ahead in 2021 for our African American students and the questions you should be asking your schools. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Joel Hazard.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Shannon. I greatly appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. Shannon, I should have the ability, or no, I don't. Could you give me the ability to share my screen?
You got it.
Okay, wonderful. So, before I really take a deep dive, everyone, I just want to go ahead and set this up. A lot of what I'm going to present today, yes, comes from data. It also comes from some books I've read. And also mixed in is my experience, being in Christian education for almost 20 years. In a good portion of that time as the only minority in the school, definitely at times the only Black male in the school. It really forces you to open your eyes. It really forces you to stay within that discomfort, as I know some of us who have to navigate predominantly white spaces, right, have to feel and just have to lean into that discomfort. A lot of this is through that particular lens. And the Lord has been very gracious to give me the patience, his wisdom, and strength to really stay in Christian education and really form a common ground. And for anyone that's in Christian education, you understand our common ground is the biblical truths. It's the life, it's the sacrifice of our Lord and Savior. And so let me go ahead and share this screen with you. Okay. Let me start out. I think it's important. I think it's important everybody understand the motivation behind this. I will tell you, this is my family, and I want you to take them in. I want you to take in every aspect of them, from their hair to their features, definitely their skin color, everything. Because I will tell you, this is my everyday life. And everything I want you to notice is what my children notice. Everything that you're noticing now can dictate how the world treats my children, how the world treats my wife and I. Now, I will tell you, I've known my wife since 7th grade. We have a great relationship, been married for 15 years now. And I will tell you, day by day, we are still fielding a lot of these questions, not just from the world, not just from our friend group, but also our children. As they continue to get older, as we know, they are forced to pick a side. For our Black students out there, they're told, hey, you're Black, and so you have to subscribe to these type of measurements. White students, same thing here. Now, for my children, imagine that conversation now. They may be too dark to be white. They may be too light to be Black, right? And so what we're seeing now, especially within our family, while we are having these conversations, there seems to be an added level to our conversations now, right? And one of the biggest things we're enforcing in our children is to say, hey, you have the best of both worlds. You're conceived and loved. God has created this union between your mom and I, and you are a reflection of that. And so as we go forward, I'm just trying to give you the background of which provides my motivation, of which provides my insight, and of which that really sets the tone for my research. And so outside of being a principal, I'm the co-founder of the Christian Educators Diversity Alliance. And the Christian Educators Diversity Alliance is an organization of Christian educators coming together to help Christian schools create a more equitable learning environment through understanding God's creation of diversity and his purpose in it. Being in private Christian education, I will tell you, there isn't a lot of information presented within when it comes to diversity and inclusion from a biblical lens. There isn't. You know, when I started to go to more and more diversity conferences, they were very secular. And so what I had to do was pretty much pick and choose what I believed, right? And then really customize that information when I came back to my environment. And so as God would have it, I had the thought of saying, why don't I just try to create an organization where we can have diversity and inclusion work, but from a biblical lens, primarily for Christian educators. I had no clue where to start, the language I would use, and it just so happened at a workshop through mutual friends, I came to know my sister in Christ, Jenny Brady, who is the Diversity and Inclusion Director at Prestonwood Academy in Dallas. And then my brother in Christ, David Robinson, who's the Diversity and Inclusion Director at Grace Community in Tyler, Texas. And as God would have it, we all had the same idea. We all went to these secular diversity workshops. And we came together and we said, wouldn't this be great? And so we went to the Lord together and we said, God, give us your wisdom, give us your words. And 3 years ago, we created the Christian Educators Diversity Alliance. We are still going strong, and we have grown. We have grown from the first time we started our organization of about 27 to 30 people to this past year of having well up to about 800, 900 viewing us, coming in and really wanting to know, hey, how can we put these things through a biblical lens? Because I will tell you this, and I will submit to you this. Racial reconciliation that we continue to talk about has already been achieved through the blood of Jesus Christ. It's already been achieved. It's we who keep messing it up. And so for us, it's just continuing to provide a platform for Christian educators to come together, right? And see that. And so that's a huge part of my ministry, right? And so again, I'm just not a principal. I'm also doing this work, right? This is also woven into everything I do. And so as we go, I'm going to be talking about the culture, curriculum, and climate. And so let's just get into our current climate. Now let's go here. Let's see this. This is what's in the world right now. This is what schools are preparing for, these types of conversations. And as you can see this collage, you got the All Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter, you have the NFL, Colin Kaepernick, right? The whole kneeling. You had Trump 2020, right? You had NASCAR banning of the Confederate flag. You had police brutality. There's been a lot of conversations around this. Our kids are bringing these conversations within our schools. And I can tell you, being on these leadership teams, going from school to school and helping them become more culturally responsive, right? Culturally sensitive, culturally aware. I can tell you there is more of an intentional approach for schools to get training on how to handle these conversations. And so I will tell you, as we go through these types of conversations, especially as it relates to COVID, our schools are starting to wake up to understand, yes, there is trauma behind this, but we also need to point out that COVID is hitting communities of color, especially the African-American community, harder. And if we talk about trauma, if we talk about our kids coming to school, anxiety-ridden, imagine adding this element now. So not only you had 9/11 And I could tell you, I learned quickly being in Texas how Harvey had its effect on people. Now we have sort of this biological, right? This chemical. I wouldn't want to say chemical warfare, but we have this chemical type of anxiety now. And so as I continue to talk with schools, I will tell you, I'm always quick to point out our thought process when we're about to address the climate. And this is typically how you want this to go. First and foremost, information is given, right? And you hope people receive with the intent to process. If they do that properly, they process. And as they're processing, they may come to a point to where they agree or disagree. They will definitely wrestle with, ponder. And then you hope they ask more questions. And as they ask more questions, people can give it back, they receive, and the cycle continues. The one thing we don't want to have happen is that as our white brothers and sisters ask questions, right, that we don't put them in a position to where they shut down. We don't want that. Because now if they shut down, they're not asking any questions. And if they're not asking any questions, they're not receiving with the intent to process, and then processing, and then having to think about this. And so as we think about our predominantly white spaces, I need to say this. This is the first time, if you think, in American history, first time in American history, our white brothers and sisters are having to process, what does it mean to be white? Think about that. People within marginalized community, we've been doing that from the get-go, right? We've been in predominantly white spaces, and in order for us to navigate those white spaces, we have to know who we are, number one, because we have to know where we fit in those spaces. But number two, we have to know the predominantly white space. Now what you have and what you see is those predominantly white spaces are shrinking. And now those predominantly white spaces are becoming now more brown, more mixed. And so now it's reversing, the pendulum is coming back. And so now our white brothers and sisters are sitting by and saying, okay, where's my place in these environments, right? And so we have to be sensitive to that. We do, because on a psychological level, that can play with you, because as we know, there are multiple levels there. And so that's one thing we need to keep in mind, is that thought process. We also have to keep in mind that we all have cultural glasses. We all do. We are all born with frames. And those frames are made of what is citizenship, what is race, what is sexuality, what is ability, what is class, what is religion, what is age, what is gender. We all have frames. And how we see these things and how the world sees us will dictate the prescription of our lenses. Will they not? Right? And so I can tell you, if I'm to put on these glasses, I'm going to have a different outlook as a Black person, right? I add gender as a Black male, definitely. If I look at citizenship, you go into my background and you find out that my background, I am, hold on, because I'm sorry, I'm sharing the screen. I have to allow people into, I just want to make sure. Let me admit all. Okay. So as I was saying, as I'm putting on these glasses and as I see citizenship, my grandfather, God rest his soul, is from the Cape Verde Islands. And some of you are saying, what Cape Verde? What is it? What is that? I want you to think of Africa, and I want you to go west. And I want you to see 10 little islands west of Africa. And one of those islands are called the Cape Verde Islands, and one of those islands is called Brava. That is where my grandfather, right off the boat from Brava, took a boat, sailed on over to America, went to Providence, Rhode Island. And I can remember growing up, he always had the broke English. His English was very broke, and he would always tell us, get your education, get your education, get your education. I remember that. Get your education, be somebody. So my view on citizenship is maybe a little different, especially as we talk about immigration, right? People from Mexico coming in, wanting a better life, just like my grandfather. I may look at that differently. And I can tell you, I look at that differently. Religion, I'm Christian, yes. I come in. Now, I'm looking at that differently, absolutely. Now, I will tell you this, as a Black man, right, reading the Bible, I'm also looking at those stories differently. And I'll explain how. Not to say we're not getting the same message, but because of my frames and because I have a different prescription, I'm looking at things possibly from different angles, right? And so as we put on our glasses, I want us to think, how have my cultural glasses shaped how I view myself and others? Not only that, what might my cultural glasses make it easy for me to see? And then conversely, what might my cultural glasses prevent me from seeing? And so because I have my glasses on, I have to respect the fact that I may see something different compared to somebody else. Definitely my white brothers and sisters, right? They have a different prescription. I'm reminded of a quote from the book White Awake by Pastor Daniel Hill. And I will go over the resources right after my presentation, and I will tell you some books that I've read. But from the book White Awake, which is an honest look at what it means to be white, Daniel Hill says, only when we embrace our lack of sight can we authorize Jesus to begin the process of illuminating the truth the truth that we so badly need to see. I think that's beautiful. We have to recognize we do have blind spots. And it's only as we come in contact with more people that may have a difference of opinion, different prescriptions, that we're able to see a much bigger picture playing out, okay? I will tell you, as we start to have these conversations and as we start to look for truth, there are 3 words that I want us to make sure we understand and we're constantly processing, and that is truth, opinion, belief. Truth, opinion, belief. And I will tell you, in my experience of having conversations, having race conversations, right? Cultural conversations, there seems to be blur lines between truth, opinion, and belief. And so truth is the quality or state of being true, right? So if I were to tell you Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, that's not opinion, that's truth, right? If we look at opinion, a view or a judgment formed about something not necessarily based on fact or knowledge, right? And then you have belief, the state of mind in which a person thinks something to be the case, with or without there being empirical evidence. So Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. That is true. Now, if I throw in there, Abraham Lincoln was the best president we have ever had. Now what we have belief and opinion playing off of one another, right? We can't categorize that as truth, but this is how it plays out. If my opinion is strong enough in the fact that Abraham Lincoln was the best president, it's going to set the tone for my belief. And because it sets the tone for my belief, I have faith in it, and therefore it becomes my truth. And we play this game over and over and over. Truth, opinion, belief, right? So we have to understand these things, and we have to be able to sit back when we're having these conversations, or when we're thinking the way in which we think. We have to be able to ask ourselves, well, is this truth? Is this something factual? Is this my opinion? Or is this my belief? And if this is my belief, is it motivated by truth, or is it motivated by my opinion? And we have to be able to look at this. And I'm telling you, these lines get blurred often. Often. And so understanding truth, opinion, belief, and being able to self-reflect and ask ourselves, my thought process, where is it stemming from, will help us to go forward and definitely help us to have more and more conversations, right, with those who disagree. For us to have conversations as well, we have to be able to have some common terms and understanding. First and foremost, When we talk diversity, because oftentimes it's very common, when we talk diversity, people automatically assume we are talking race. We're just talking black, white, right? We have to understand first and foremost that you sitting where you are right now, you are diverse. Let's look at this. Let's look at the quadrants in identity, diversity, who we are. Well, it can be broken down in race, age, ethnicity, gender, and please understand this. Orientation has crept into that category. So my Christian brothers and sisters, orientation is something we're going to have to tackle. If we look at cognitive diversity, how we think, there are a variety of ways in which we think. We have analytical thinkers, we have risk takers, practical, empathetic, creative thinkers. On the call right now, we also have affective diversity, how we feel about situations, right? And so I take the George Floyd thing happen. Man, furious. Very furious. As a black man, I sat back and I was furious. I was angry. I will tell you, for some of my white brothers and sisters, they felt uncomfortable. They were like, I want to reach out to Joel. I don't know what to say. I can't possibly imagine what he's feeling. Right? There was a sense of being insecure, right? I just don't know what to say, right? So we have affective diversity working. And then we have behavioral diversity, how we lead. We have different leadership styles, work styles. We communicate differently. That's us right now. And so if I were to line up, let's just say a bunch of white males, same hair color, same dress, everything. That is diversity because, right, we have cognitive diversity, affective diversity, behavioral diversity, but I will submit this to you. We always go to the superficial first, that identity diversity. Why? It's because it's what we see on the surface. It's easily seen, it's easily recognizable, and because we've been so socialized, it's easy to put tags on it. Now, in order for us to get to the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral, guess what we have to do? We have to be able to have relationships with people. And then you start to learn their cognitive, their behavioral, their affective. Now, I will tell you, let's come down to diversity and inclusion, what it is. I see this, most of our schools are having a hard time deciphering, well, what's the difference, diversity and inclusion? And this is the perfect visual I can give anybody. Diversity is having multiple pieces, different shades, but inclusion is how those pieces connect. So it's like you inviting me to the dance. That's diversity, I'm invited. Inclusion is asking me to dance. So I'm included in. And so we have to understand some of our schools at this point have operated off of the false sense of, well, we have diversity. We're in, and so we're already showing we're inclusive. Boom, no, that's not the case. Sometimes we just have the numbers, that's it. And we have to say, do our students of color feel included? And I would say some of our schools, that is a common misconception, that we have the diversity, but we don't have the inclusion piece. And so when I say we don't have the inclusion piece, let me show you, and I'm sorry, as I go through, let me show you what I mean. And did I have it on here? Yes, here we go. This is what happened. George Floyd happened. For those that don't know, I'm out of Atlanta, Georgia. And so I spent 14 years at a private Christian school in Atlanta. This summer, George Floyd hits, we all know. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a story on Atlanta private schools, secular, faith-based. And what happened after the George Floyd thing happened? You started to have our students of color, primarily our Black students of color, current students, former alumni, come together, connect, and now start to talk about their experiences within their schools. So much so you start to see hashtags all around social media. Hashtag Black at Paideia, Black at Galloway, Black here, Black there. We've even seen it in Texas. We've seen it in North Carolina. It really has been seen all around. And so we've seen within these articles, students and grads share their pain, talk about the microaggressions they've had to go through, talk about how things have been said and nothing has been done. They have also talked about how they have not really felt they belonged. They haven't really felt much significance in their space. And so I take it back to that diversity and inclusion piece. And I will tell you, our schools now are waking up to the fact that while they may have had diversity, they haven't effectively had that inclusion piece. Okay? And so that's just something. So let's dive in to curriculum. And I want to share this with you. I have a background in curriculum and instruction, and I hear about it all the time from parents. Well, how are we talking about these things in our class? Right? What is in the curriculum? And I will tell you this. How many of you know your curriculum director at your school? How many of you know his or her name? How many of you know? Let's think about this. Because I will tell you, within our schools, the curriculum director, they're responsible for making sure our scope and sequence is on point, making sure that our curriculum is up to date, and we are addressing a lot of the current issues. I will tell you, some of the common misconception when it comes to curriculum that I see across the board from teachers is that the curriculum equals the textbook. And let me tell you, no. The textbook is static information. Do you think our textbook has in it the life and death of C.T. Vivian, civil rights icon? Right? Or any other icons we see out there that are now just passing? Probably not. Do you think they have what is going on now, the COVID and how it's hitting communities of color? Do you think they have the effect of Trump 2020? That's static information. So what has to happen with curriculum? And I want you to look to see what curriculum is. It is our institutional vision. And I will tell you, for our students that go to Christian schools, biblical truths are woven in to the curriculum because it's part of our institutional vision. You also have in there educational beliefs, teacher values, student and teacher interactions. It's living and breathing. So for my mom and dads out there, curriculum is living and breathing. It requires feedback from student, teachers. Teachers have to be able to sit back and say, I just gave a great lesson. That didn't go so well. This is what my student population is saying. So I have to revamp. I have to make sure it's up to date. And so let's understand that curriculum is living and breathing, very much so. And so as we get into curriculum, so what is it? It's defined as a plan for achieving goals. It requires, as we see, it involves these steps: purpose, design, implementation, assessments. So we have to be able to sit back and say, what is the purpose of our curriculum? Well, it's to provide our students with up-to-date information, students that will spark innovation, collaboration, right? It's to give them that knowledge they need. So you have the purpose, you have the particular design. How are we going to go about implementing it? And once it's implemented, what are the measurements? How are we going to assess whether or not our kids understand some of the core beliefs, the values, the objectives? We have to understand our approach reflects our perceptions, values, knowledges, views of school and society. And so hear me on this. Curriculum consists of the ongoing experiences of children under the guidance of the school. Now, let me show you something. Let me show you something. Now, and I apologize. as I go through. I love this Prezi PowerPoint because it allows me, here's what the data is saying. And I want you to see this. This is from the Census Bureau. This is from the National Center of Educational Statistics. This is from Pew Research. First and foremost, children of color make up the majority of births in America. That is already here. Minority students collectively are the majority in public schools right now. The class of 2025 is expected to be the biggest and most diverse class we have ever graduated. Diversity is already in our class. Teachers are already figuring out that in order to reach my kids of color, I have to understand them from a cultural perspective first. I have to know their cultural reality. Because guess what? If I'm presenting content and it doesn't have a cultural context to it, are my kids going to grasp to it? Are they going to be engaged? Are they going to participate? I want you to see this. Teachers, 82% of K through 12 teachers in the nation are white. 62% are white women. When it comes to the breakdown of teachers of color only make up 17% of that pie, of the whole pie. Of that 17%, only 2% are Black males. And I say this to you, mom and dad, is because I hear it all the time from parents that come in. How come we don't have any more teachers of color? How come we don't see any Black males? And please know and understand, it's a numbers game. If you look across the board from colleges and universities, we're having a huge increase of more people of color that are attending colleges and universities. But they're not really going into the educational field. And if they do go into the educational field, chances are they're going to do their student teaching within a public school setting. Because these colleges and universities have created somewhat of a monopoly, right, to give their undergrads experience within the public school sector. So when they graduate, guess what? Chances are they usually have a job already in the public school sector. Out of that 2% of Black males, chances are they are going back to the public school because that's where they came from and they want to give back. And so now our schools are really having to be intentional. They're really having to be strategic now to pair up with these career development departments at colleges. They're having to really be intentional with getting into these educational departments with colleges and universities and saying, how can we form a partnership so we can introduce your undergrads to private education, private Christian education? That is what we're seeing. So our schools are now having to form plans on how we can set up those relationships. And I need you to know something, mom and dad. If we do get teachers of color that come into our private school environments, studies will show you they will stay no more than 2 to 3 years tops. And the reason being is this. Number one, there is no room for upper mobility. There is no room for upper mobility. I will tell you, within the private school sector, they have higher retention rates than public schools. So there is a lack of upper mobility, number one. Number two, teachers of color will leave our environment because they don't see an importance in diversity. That's we get back to schools saying, hey, we have the diversity, we're good, but don't do much to work on inclusion. And then third, teachers of color will leave private education because they're unsatisfied within their job or salary. There's only so much private schools can do within salary, but when it comes to job satisfaction, we need to be better at. So those are the 3 reasons. Those have been documented. That is something that's been going on for years. I will tell you, our schools are preparing themselves for their kids for higher education. I want you to see this. The reason why I have schools in North Carolina is I did a breakdown I did a little soft audit on a school in North Carolina and where their graduates were going. And the top choices their graduates were going in North Carolina at this one private school was North Carolina, NC State, Wake Forest, Duke, and UNC Charlotte. And so I asked these schools to really think about what colleges, what type of student colleges are looking for. If you look at any single one of these colleges, all the college, university you want your child to go to, I guarantee you there is a diversity and inclusion department on campus. I guarantee you. That is looking to create a very inclusive environment. And the people they want walking their campus are those kids that feel comfortable in a very inclusive environment. Now, that's white, black, brown, Asian. That's all students. Now, if you look at the type of college essay questions that are being put out there for our kids to answer, this was one of them that I came across. And it reads like this: everyone belongs to many different communities and or groups defined by, amongst other things, shared geography, religion, ethnicity, income, cuisine, interest, race, ideology, or intellectual heritage. Choose one of the communities to which you belong and describe that community in your place within it. That is pretty deep, would you say? That is deep. So now our kids, black, brown, right? Especially for our white kids, our white students are having some trouble saying now, okay, I have to choose one of these communities. What is my place in it, right? They have to figure out if they belong. And now they're going to have to figure what is their impact in that environment. Because colleges want kids, they want students that are going to come on their campus and make the campus better. These questions are out there. Now, I will tell you, for our students of color, especially our black students who are in predominantly white spaces, this is going to come easier to them because they're doing it now. They're part of this predominantly white community, and they're already thinking about what is my place in it, and they're trying to figure out how can I make my environment better. So they're already doing it. I see a good portion of white students having a hard time answering these questions. So I want you to know this is what's happening. Colleges want students of all races to be able to answer this question, right?
Mr. Hazard.
Yes.
As you are talking about questions, I know that your time is running close to an end, but we have some very important questions that are being posed that I would love to give you a chance to answer really quickly.
And I'm sorry, as I go through, would love to answer those questions, yes. And so let me get to the chat feature. Okay, here we go.
And I can pose a couple of them to you if you'd like for me to jump on in. One is from Linda Wright. Hello, Mrs. Wright. She is a teacher who is, as she says, so grateful for the history lesson that she's receiving today and the information that is being shared. She's learning so much. And as an educator, she wants to know, how can she help her students and what kinds of conversations should she be having with them? And, you know, in that, how should she intervene in the conversations that students have? She loves her students. She doesn't want anything, you know, to cause them to distrust her. She wants to affirm and encourage them. So is she being presumptive? How can she as a teacher be impactful in this conversation in her students' lives?
Well, great question, Ms. Wright. I will tell you, first and foremost, you have to do some research on the back end. You have to be able to analyze who you are within this space. And then you also have to be able to break down who your students are. Now, I will tell you, I would caution any educator really going to students and asking them, hey, can you educate me? We have to remember our students are not our racial therapists, right? Our students are trying to figure it out themselves. And so, Mrs. Wright, you really have to be intentional to really go to your friend groups, to go to your communities of color that you feel comfortable with. Also go online and be able to research Well, what is the experience of my students of color out in this world? Number one, what are their experiences? Number two, you have to be able to ask yourself, do I know these experiences? Number one. If you don't know these experiences, you need to be able to ask yourself, why don't I know these experiences? And you have to be able to do these research. You have to be able to take a deeper dive. I will tell you, my brother, Dr. Hines, what stood in my head when I heard him speak is, he says, we have to live in the background, the common ground, and the higher ground. We have to be able to live in someone's background. We have to know their individual stories, their perceptions, right? Their viewpoints. We have to live there, because if we live there, it's easy for us to establish that common ground. And as I live in someone's background, I'm able to point out what are our similarities, right? As I live in your background, I hear your stories. Also, as I live in your background, I'm able to figure out where are our differences. And then from there, I'm able to ask, well, why are we different on these things? And so I will tell you, Ms. Wright, it's going to take a lot of self-reflection. It's going to take some research, the reading of books, and really having these conversations with people in which you trust and you feel you can be vulnerable with. That is how you're able to really understand where your students are coming from. And then from there, I will tell you, in my experience, students want to know they are supported within your class. They want to know if anything pops up that's racially insensitive, that you're able, number one, to address it on the spot and not be silent. Being silent within that time is reinforcing the status quo, is really being compliant, and is really showing that you've made a decision. You've heard it and you've chosen, I'm not addressing it. Now, you leave it up to the student now to decipher why you've been so silent. Is it because you don't care? Is it because you really don't know how to handle it? Or is it because it's not important to you, right? And so we really have to think about those things on that level. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hazard. I love that you said that our kids are not our therapists, and we can have a whole conversation about adultification and how oftentimes our kids are required to carry the burden of answering for their entire race or representing the viewpoints of everyone. And to be able to take that burden off as adults, as the teacher in the classroom, is something that's so important. So thank you so much for that answer. Our final question for you is from Mr. Tolliver. He asked, what are some practical ways for Christian schools who operate from a white-centered culture to begin to diversify their curriculum choices?
Yes. As they do the curriculum breakdown, they have to look at their scope and sequence, much like what we do when we're implementing biblical truths. And I will tell you, here's the process. We look at our scope and sequence, right, across the board. Our schools have vertical teams to where you may have your lower school history department meet with your middle school history department, meet with your upper school history department. And from there, they're able to show the scope and sequence. So once a kid graduates from lower school, here are the historical objectives they should already know coming into middle school, and then from middle school to upper school. I will tell you, as we look at the scope and sequence, we have to be looking for ways in which we can incorporate multiple voices. Where are opportunities for us to bring these conversations up in very organic ways? And so as I look, and this is what I was going to express, as you go to your curriculum director, you need to be asking, how are multiple voices incorporated within the curriculum? Our teachers sitting down and saying, listen, how are all of our students represented within the curriculum, number one? You need to be able to go to your curriculum director and ask what measures are in place to ensure the incorporation of multiple voices. Because I guarantee you, as teachers sit down, they're going through their objectives. What is the meat and potato of the information I need my kids to get before I pass them on? We need to be able to sit down and do a curriculum audit every year so that it reflects current trends, right? Especially now that we're seeing certain things. We need to be able to see certain trends. And so, for example, My biology teacher needs to be able to sit back and say, okay, I'm looking at the chemical makeup. It's changing. The world is browning. People are coming together. Maybe I want to do a lesson on melanin in my biology class, right? That really talks about skin tones, right? And the part melanin plays. In my history department, I may want to sit back and talk about the great civil rights icons that are passing now, right? Definitely John Lewis, definitely C.T. Vivian, right? What was their accomplishments? We need to be able to look at our curriculum again as living and breathing. And then we also need to be able to look at our curriculum from a biblical lens. How are we incorporating God's creation of diversity within that curriculum, right? We are having curriculum conversations all the time, but we need to be able to ask ourselves, how is this curriculum reflecting multiple voices? And so I hope I was able to answer that question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hazard. You have just given us so much information to take in. You've definitely informed our perspective. So thank you again. I do have one last question that I believe we have time for you to cover. And it's asked by Dylan Thomas. Would you suggest a minority student address a teacher's wildly insensitive or overstepping their bounds? I guess this question is asking, how should students address teachers in the event that some type of discussion concerning diversity or the lack thereof arises in the classroom?
Right. I'll tell you, one of the biggest things is we have to remember we're all human. Presentation goes a long way, does it not? So our presentation should be calm and cool. It should not be, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you saying that, right? Because then that naturally puts people on the defensive, right? I would say for any student want to approach their teacher, you should feel empowered to do so, right? I'll tell you, our private school environments pride themselves on being communities that cultivate relationship, that cultivate family, that cultivate community. For my students of color out there, I want you to feel empowered to go up to a teacher after hours and say, listen, this is how I feel. I will tell you, by you taking that position, this is how I feel. This is how I felt. This is what I think we need more of. Personalizes, right? The content you want your teachers to put on display. And so we need to be able to take our teachers on the side and say, listen, I don't feel we're doing enough here. If you, my students of color, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, bring your mom and dad with you, right? To say, listen, this is what we're feeling. I don't feel I'm being represented. I don't feel my voice is being heard, right? Because what you don't want to do is all of a sudden ask in the middle of class, hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It could be a potential blind spot for a teacher that they don't know what they're doing, right? And so I would always operate assuming good intent. Maybe they just don't know what they don't know. And now you can approach and say, listen, this is what I would like to see more of. This is what I think needs to be incorporated. Because now that you've brought it up, you've addressed it, a teacher can't say they don't know. Now you sit back and you see how they go about taking what you have brought to the table and now incorporating it into the classroom. So I strongly encourage that our students approach their teachers. Yes, work on that. That is you being socially vulnerable, right? That is you just vulnerability you approach. And I'll tell you that vulnerability strengthens trust. And now your teacher is able, hopefully, to be vulnerable back to say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. What are some ways do you think I can do X, Y, and Z, right? And so I think I would strongly encourage our students to do that. If they feel empowered to do so, and if they don't want to go alone, bring another student. But what you don't want to do is have the presentation in a way that you're bringing a mob saying, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, right?
Equipping our children to build relationships, start conversations, and spark change. Mr. Hazard, thank you so much for that conversation. The information that you have shared has been invaluable. We appreciate your time with us today, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys listening.
And so for everyone who is joining us today, who has been with us, we are excited to have our upcoming panel of students. We're going to give everybody about a minute as we transition, and we'd love for you to gather your students together. We want to make sure that they are engaged in this conversation. So go ahead and get your kids involved, get them on the call as well. We want to make sure that we're all inspired and informed by hearing from our students. So we have about 30 seconds or so. Go ahead and gather your family, your kids, and remember, have them to use the chat. If your students have questions that they would like to pose to their peers, go ahead and have them begin typing them in. We're excited about the discussion that we'll be having, and it's important that we involve our students in this discussion. We want to make sure that their voices are heard because this is all about empowering them. Amen. We're empowering parents and we're empowering our next generation to lead and to succeed. All right. So with that said, I am so excited to introduce the facilitator for our upcoming student panel. It is Miss Taylor Gills. Taylor is, she's going to serve as the moderator. She's currently a junior at Spelman College. Hats off to you, Taylor. She's in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's a major. She's majoring in sociology and she's minoring in writing. So Taylor, we are so excited about who you are. We're excited about you being here. Thank you so much for agreeing to facilitate today, and welcome, Taylor.
Thank you so much. So yes, my name is Taylor and I have the absolute honor of moderating this. I'd like to thank Mr. Tolliver for the opportunity. So we have about 5 panelists, I think, today. So first we have Emmanuel Ukot. He's a college junior as well, and so is Madison Simon. And Ubong, I believe Ubong is on here still. But we also have Sarah, Madison Hayes, and Nina, I believe she's on here too. And they are students, high school students at a local high school in the city of Houston. So our first question, this is open to the panel. It says, do you think that you become more aware and knowledgeable of your place racially in America since you were in high school? Or if you're still in high school, do you think that especially like, you know, since recent events that you become more aware socially of your place in America? That's for anybody.
Yes. Hi, I'm Madison Hayes. So I do believe that I have been more socially aware in a sense because I've always kind of been aware. Thanks to my parents that have kind of put that in my life, and they've really helped me understand from a young age. So these events have really opened my eyes in a sense to where I feel more like I understand these people, because during the Black Lives Matter movement, I want to get out there, you know. I want to help people. I want to be a part of the movement, and I think it's just something about it being in my generation and during my time that I really connected even more. So I do believe that I have been more socially aware, especially through social media and things like that. So yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in? Good. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Weber. And I think that maybe not necessarily in a general sense, because like Maddie said, I've been socially aware because of my parents and stuff. But like I've become more aware of like the people I hang out with and like the people that aren't necessarily Black that I hang out with, because the way that they hold themselves during this movement and stuff, I've noticed a lot of things that I might notice.
Yes, so great answers. So to lead into question 2, we have, how easy was it for you as a person of color to operate in a school system where most of the administration was white? Open for the panel as well.
Hi, I'm Madison. I think it was a little bit difficult for me to operate in a white school, basically because I didn't feel they understood me enough, and or nor did they really try to understand me, I would say. um it was more of just, I wouldn't say pass me off, but I felt more connected to African American faculty because they understood me and my struggles. So
Certainly my exact same experience. I agree with you 100%. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Nina Singleton. I do agree with y'all. I do agree with Madison and Taylor. I do agree that since me coming from a all Black preschool and kind of like growing up, around Black friends and family members and everything, I do agree that it is hard to incorporate going into a school district where the administration is all white. I feel like they don't listen to you as well, and you feel scared to speak up and show your opinions on everything, especially based on this time and everything that's going around. Just like how Sarah and Madison said, like with social media, you like truly see where your non like Black friends and people like stand and sit, and like you see all around.
Okay, so if we're good on that question, we can also continue to stay in the lines with the administration and question if you ever felt like your experience as a Black person wasn't honored enough by the administration in your place of learning. For example, were there conversations about oppression, Black historical figures, current events that exhibited the inequality of the justice system, or anything else along those lines?
okay, it's Madison again. I
You muted yourself. I can hear
Oh my bad.
you.
The only time that we really had like a talk about Black history more in depth besides Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And don't get me wrong, they were very prominent in the Black movement, but civil rights movement, I mean. But I don't. That's all I knew was Malcolm X and Martin Luther King until I got to my institution now. I go to a HBCU, but the only time we really had a talk about Black history was when one of the faculty decided to do, like, every morning we would do a Black fact, basically, or an African American fact, basically. So it wasn't really, I don't know if they were just, I guess they weren't educated enough or didn't want to talk about it, but I didn't know anything. And then also it goes off of social media too. I've learned more about um, Black history on social media and at my institution than I have in the school system.
So yes, I totally agree with her. Um, this happens so much. um, where the lack of representation in our textbooks is so great that I learn about the same things in history, the same things about George Washington, about Thomas Jefferson, and they weren't even that great. So I really relied on my parents and my family and people that I knew to educate me about these different topics. And I've put myself in spaces where I can educate myself even more, and in Black spaces with Black educators that have really helped me out, learning about my history, learning more about current problems, and how I should handle it. And I really thank them for that. I feel like Black administration in schools is so important because because you have someone there that understands you, and that can teach you like proper history, because like Black history is history. So I think it's really important that we need to know that. And as she said, um, Madison, I believe before, um, she said that we, all she knew was Martin Luther King Jr. and he was the only one in the textbooks. So we really had to rely on other sources to get even more information. So yeah, there is definitely a lack of representation.
Well, having gone to the same all Black preschool that Nina did, we were taught a lot of the things that we wouldn't be taught in the predominantly white schools when we were very little, which I think it was helpful, but having been like 3 and 4, it's not really embedded in my brain, like, of course. But having social media and stuff now, I think that is a benefit, but it can also be really bad. But in school systems, in like the past 5 years or so, I've only had maybe 2 teachers that have taught me things I didn't know from when I was like 5 and 6. So
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much all for your answers. So next for question 4, we have, did you ever experience racism or microaggressions in these institutions, in your high schools, colleges?
So I did experience some microaggression and racism. So we were in class and we were talking about where we were going to school, and um, me and a couple of the students said we were going to HBCUs. And one student said, "I don't like what I don't like HBCUs. Why are the HBCUs? I don't like that." And it still haunts me to this day because I was unable to really educate him and tell him about why I decided to go to a historical black college. Um, so yes, well, knowing what I know now, I should have said something, but yeah, I have, and it still haunts me.
Certainly. Anybody else?
I experience these on a day-to-day basis because this happens so much. Just like those little things that nobody else catches that you catch, this it just keeps happening. But yes, I believe microaggressions are they're that's why they call them micro, because no one really hears it. No one really understands it except for you. And I believe it happens a lot in white spaces, just off of things that they've been taught, things that they've heard, things that they think are funny, just trying to be funny. And it's not at all in a sense funny. And I have, of course, I told you before, I've experienced this many times. Even if it's about my hair, if it's about maybe another race. I hear this all the time about uh, Latino boys and girls making jokes about that, making jokes about, you used to be in the cotton field, stuff like that. Go pick your watermelon or dumb stuff like that. And even you can hear from teachers too. You hear from teachers, they don't realize it, they just keep talking about it, that's why it's small. So, stuff like that. And um I just think that teachers need to be aware of what they're saying, even down to the littlest things. So I believe that they need to be, I believe in speaking out and telling them when they've done wrong, what they said wrong. If you know me, I'm a very outspoken person. When you do something wrong, I'm gonna tell you. And I've emailed teachers. I've um, protested in a sense. I've done all sorts of things to get my voice heard, and I believe that's what Black students should do.
Perfect. Yeah, I've definitely had my experience with teachers too. Like one time I came to school and I typically like am natural. And then I came to school one time, my hair straightened, and this was a white coach. And she was like, "Oh, your hair looks so sophisticated, or you look sophisticated." So I was like, okay, and that's also another situation for me, like where I didn't realize until after, like, how it was kind of off. But I would agree, definitely. So we have about time for 1 or 2 more questions. So we are going to go to, was there ever pressure to assimilate to white norms on your campus? That's open for the panel as well.
Like Maddie was saying about the jokes that people would just make, I think that like I started to just like brush them off as like just like they did because it just was normal. But I mean, I think that would have something to do with just getting used to it, like you were saying in the question. But like Madison said about speaking up about it, I just didn't because I didn't really notice until after the fact. And I think that could have something to do with just adjusting to what they're doing instead of fixing what they're doing, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, just like how Madison was saying, I think that in some way, shape, or form, we've all like dealt with racism. I think that we probably haven't noticed, and even the people that have expressed like the racism towards us, they probably haven't noticed because, like Maddie said, it's so little and it's like the micro things. For example, one time when I was in kindergarten, like it's just the little jokes. Like, I had some white friends I played with. They told me that I couldn't play with them because I was Black. So, like, it's just the little things. And it's like just little jokes and little nicks that just pick and just like that.
Yeah, I also agree. I'm Emmanuel. Throughout my time in high school, there were definitely jokes that were made at the expense of how I acted or my skin color. I had many jokes such as Midnight, Dark Rider, a whole bunch of nice little names that I didn't know was slowly chipping away at how I viewed myself. And one thing that actually happened at a college interview, I was interviewing with one of the Ivy Leagues, and I interviewed in Houston. I got to the interview stage and went up to this fancy high rise, and there was this man. Of course, he didn't look like me, but he was the one interviewing, and it was supposed to be about 30 minutes, and it ended up lasting almost 2 hours. There was a line of other people that were supposed to interview behind us. We were in this nice fancy office, and at the end of the interview, he seemed so impressed, and he told me how he's going to do everything he can to get me into this Ivy League institution. That I'm so well spoken. I have such a great background. I have so many leadership qualities. I'm just so well put together. I'm just not like my kind. And when he said that, I didn't really know how to react. I've heard small things in my high school. I didn't know somebody would be so bold as to say it in a college interview. And that sort of, to me, unfortunately cemented my decision. Well, fortunately, cemented my decision to take up Taylor's offer and to go to an HBCU, and that's why I'm at Xavier University of Louisiana. Because I realized that for me personally, being raised in a predominantly white space all of my life, being an African immigrant, well, really from London. I was born in London and moved here to the US, and being told from when I was 4 years old, never to walk out of the house without closed-toed shoes and nice pants on, make sure you have a collared shirt. I had collared shirts up until I was in 10th grade. No jeans, make sure you have slacks. No shorts in public, make sure you have slacks. If you got to go to the pool, put it in your backpack and take it to the pool and change when you get there. You got to go to the gym, change when you get there. Because somebody has to stop you on the road and they'll profile you. And so being raised in a space like that and getting all the way up until college and being told, oh, you're just not like your kind. It made me realize it was way more than just a couple of coincidences in high school. It wasn't just something I randomly experienced, but happened to be over and over and over again. It was systemic. It is systemic. And so, yeah, that's my experience with that, assimilating to white norms.
Yes. Yeah.
Taylor.
Sorry, Taylor. Oh, sorry. One more thing. So whenever you, as being a Black girl, and being in sports, being athletic, for team pictures in volleyball, we had to come. They said come with your hair up. They never really specified if we can change it or not. So I came for pictures and I had my hair up, right? And so they're like, oh, change of plans, everybody wear your hair down. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't ready for this. My hair wasn't, I have to twist it the night before. I have to untwist it in the morning, come ready. I wasn't ready that day. So I have to fix my hair, try to make it look presentable, and then come out and take a picture. Those are just like little things that people don't understand and that they need to be aware of. And also, I have friends in cheerleading, where they always have to wear their hair down and in like an up hairstyle, which can be difficult for Black girls because you always have to either flat iron your hair, blow dry it out, or have braids in some protective style. So yeah, this is just little things that I've experienced and that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, I can definitely say that I've experienced that too, Madison. I am one of the people that she was talking about being the cheerleader. I'm a cheerleader, and they've always asked us to do our hair. Oh, you need to wear it in a high ponytail. You need to wear it with like a braid, or you need to do this and this. And I'm like, okay, we all have different hair textures. And it's just the little things like that when they change stuff, and then you have to do stuff based on you because you're different with your hair. Just like she said, you either have to get braid, flat iron it. You wake up in the morning, you probably untwisted it, put some elastic bands in, and it's just like for them to change it, it's just a whole lot of steps for us. So it's literally the little things like that. And I've experienced so much of that throughout the years of me being a cheerleader and in other sports.
No, I am loving hearing from all of our students. So we want to make sure that we capture those students who are posting questions in the chat. So Taylor, if you could take a look at Dylan's question and make sure that it is posed so that our panelists can respond.
Okay, I'm just gonna read the whole thing. Okay, so it says, navigating my role as a Black student under a largely white facility is difficult, or faculty is difficult. I'm also one of 4 Black students in my grade. I love affinity groups such as this. We know how it feels to be singled out when Black lessons come around and expected not to be to be knowledgeable about any other histories. I tend to feel alone, and I have felt this way for a large part of my educational experience. That is why I gravitate to groups like this and am always a proponent of Black leadership in school systems. Was there another? So, yeah.
Thank you so much for thank you, Dylan, for that response. And I think that as Black students and as Black people in mostly white spaces, that we need to not rely on somebody else to make a space, but we need to make our own space. I believe in making clubs, making organizations for us, talking to your administration about fixing the curriculum. Like, you need to get that together. Fixing the curriculum, making things better for us and our needs, not just seeing to one person's needs, but really embracing that diversity that they keep talking about. And really, and I've talked to teachers, I've tried to make clubs, I've tried to make things better for people, and I've been in many organizations for Black girls, one being Justice for Black Girls, that they have taught me so much about Black girlhood and being and making our own table and making our own space. So I thank you, Dylan, for sharing your experiences with us.
Yeah, of course, Madison. I love this space and I love the conversation that we're having.
Perfect.
Well, you know, as we close, I was just taken aback to see Dylan's face. Oh my goodness, all of you are just growing so rapidly. Y'all are making me old. But Taylor, thank you so much for facilitating. Thank you for sharing your experience. Our daughter, she went to Spelman, so you know, Clark, Atlanta, Spelman, all that up there. Dana went to up there in the ACU, so hats off to all of you, and all of you who are attending HBCUs. Know that we are praying for you. We are rooting for you. We're rooting for all of the students on the panel, all the families that are represented today. We are rooting for you. And so as we are closing, remember, this is the first of several conversations we'll be having under the We Wear the Mask series. So make sure that you stay in touch. Make sure that you keep following, so that you'll be aware and you'll be notified of the next conversation that we'll be having. Also, remember, we have streamed this conversation live on the Crossing Point Church Facebook page. If you like the Crossing Point Church page, you will be able to access this conversation. We're also streaming live on the Crossing Point Church YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to the Crossing Point Church YouTube channel, you'll be able to access the conversation once again. And so with that said, I'm overjoyed to have been your host. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Tolliver for our closing remarks.
Thank you, Shannon. As we come to a close, I want to thank everyone who's gotten on today and who's stuck with us during this time. Been a great conversations, great presentations, and a lot of information that has been disseminated. My challenge to you is to put this into practice. My challenge for our parents is to sit down with your students, talk to them, validate their experiences, seek out ways for us to understand ourselves so that we can understand others. And we will be coming back together again later this fall with the We Wear the Mask in My Feelings segment, where we'll talk about Black mental health, and we'll have some different presenters and also another student panel. I will be reaching out to you. We have your email addresses, and we want to thank not only our parents, but also I saw some teachers from FBCA out there. I want to thank you guys for coming out, and I want to encourage you to join us, but also bring someone else as well. The goal of today's presentation, the goal of our workshops today in our conference today was to educate, uplift, equip, and empower. And with that being said, we want to bring someone else along with us. We want to go from a moment in time to a movement. So I want to thank you. I want to close out in a word of prayer, if you don't mind, and we will let you go this afternoon. Would you bow with me? Father God, we come at this time, thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, for just allowing this moment in time, Lord, for us to be able to come together with the one spirit, with unison, and with the mindset, Lord, to just give voice where there hasn't been voice, Lord, to wonder and to just continue to discover, Lord, places that may have been dark for us. We come at this time, Lord, praying for our parents and for our students as they go into the beginning of the school year with all the circumstances and the uncertainties surrounding them, Lord. We pray, Father, that you help us to hold close to you. We ask, Lord, that you be with those students that were on the panel today, the presenters, everyone who made this possible, Lord. We thank you, Father, for Crossing Point Church. We thank you, Lord, for Pastor Hayes and his wife and all the people, Lord, who have just worked behind the scenes to make this moment possible. Father, we come praying that you bless us, bless our efforts, bless our work, and bless the work of our hands. We ask, Lord, that you just continue to be with us and guide us in all truth. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for joining us today.